The air in the park mansion living room is tense as Jimin paces back and forth, the dark aura surrounding him as his mind races. Mrs. Park and his younger brother Jihoon sit on the sofa, avoiding his gaze. His father, Mr. Park, watches silently from his place, his authority unmistakable, each sensing the impending storm. The silence is broken when a man cautiously steps into the room, his body trembling slightly under Jimin's fierce gaze. Jimin stopping mid-pace, his voice cold, his eyes burning with fury. "What is it?" Man, hesitating voice speaks. "Boss C is nowhere to be found." The words hung in the air. Jimin throws his phone against the wall, his fist clenching as he runs his hand through his hair, a curse escaping his lips. Jimin fuming, pointing towards the man who had just spoken. "It's been more than 12 hours since I come back and send you all to find her, and you have come up with nothing. Are you all this useless?" His mind races, recalling that he had came back home yesterday night only to find you gone. His men had searched everywhere and still you couldn't be found. His mother said you left on your own accord, but something in his gut tells him there's more than that. Was it his coldness that drove her away? Why didn't you left when he was at his coldest? Why now, when things were supposed to be better? His mind doesn't stop. Jimin shouting, his voice shaking with rage. 2 weeks, and no one had the decency to tell me. Now no one knows where she is. He turns to face his mother and younger brother, fury radiating from him, eyes flashing as he steps towards Jihoon. "Jimin, if anything happens to her, anything, I swear to God, Jihoon, you're gone. I promise." Jihoon flinched, not daring to speak. Mrs. Park sitting quietly in his place. Mr. Park remains calm, watching the situation unfold with authority. Just then, door opens again and a high-ranking police officer enters, his demeanor serious. He is accompanied by a few subordinates, one of them carrying a small packet which gleams under the light. Holding a packet, walks towards the table and places it carefully, his expression serious. Police officer, in a respectful but firm tone, "Mr. Park, we found this." The officer slides the packet over to Jimin, who instantly recognizes the locket inside. His breath hitches as he reaches for it, his hands shaking slightly as he picks it up. His eyes flash with recognition. Jimin, barely audible, his voice strained. "It's hers, it's Ryan's." He holds the locket in his hand as the weight of what's happening crashes over him. His mind races. The police officer said, breaking his train of thought, looking at Mr. Park with measured respect. "Jimin, don't dare to finish your sentence." Jimin's voice suddenly exploded, cutting off the officer, shaking with barely contained fury, causing everyone to flinch at the intensity of his outburst. "Jimin, she is fine. I know she is fine. Leave it. All of you are useless. I'll find her myself. I don't need anyone." His anger surges, his hands gripping the locket so tightly it might break. His eyes burn with fury as he storms out of the room. His every step echoes with determination to find you. His bodyguards quickly follow him, knowing better than to try and stop him. Jihoon whispers, trembling, "Jim Hyun?" Mrs. Park whispers to herself, her voice full of guilt. What have we done? What if something happens to her? Jihoon shaking in fear. "Amma, do you think Hyung will ever forgive me for this? For everything?" Mrs. Park looking at her husband, then at Jihoon, her face pale. "He will find her, right?" Her voice ached with fear. Meanwhile, Mr. Park sitting back in his chair, his voice calm but loaded with bitterness. Mr. Park is not just going to find her to bring her back. The question now is whether she is alive. If she is not, we all know who Jimin will come for. The room falls into a tense silence, the weight of Mr. Park's words hanging over all them. Jihoon and Mrs. Park exchanging glances, fear evident in both of their eyes. Jimin walked out, the locket in his hand, a lifeline he's clinging to. He won't let anyone or anything stop him from finding you. His bodyguards follow quickly, but Jimin doesn't speak to them. His mind is consumed with thoughts of you. Without wasting time, he storms down the stair and into his car, slamming the door shut with a deafening bang. Jimin, I won't lose you, Wan. I will this city to crown if I have to. Your mind speaking to himself as he speeds down the road, his voice quiet but filled with steel. The world outside blur as he focuses only on the road ahead, driven by one singular goal, finding you. Jimin's car screeches to a halt outside his headquarters, tires leaving black marks on the pavement. As soon as he steps out, his bodyguards surround him. Their expressions serious. He doesn't waste a second marching through the front doors of the building, like a storm ready to tear through everything in its path. Inside, his men are scattered across the room, their eyes glued to various monitors scanning every camera feed, every public transport route, every place you could have been. They are working quickly, but it's clear from the tension in the room that time is running out. Jimin, what is the update? Don't tell me you have found nothing. His voice low as he walks into the center of the room, his gaze cold and unwavering. Lead man, boss, we have been tracking every public transport route Mrs. Park could have been taken. We have checked the cameras, the bus station, everything, but... The man spoke nervously, standing up, sweat on his brow, but trying to keep his composure. He hesitates, clearly not wanting to add to Jimin's growing anger. Jimin, voice sharp, cutting him off. But what? Spit it out. Lead man, swallowing hard, trying to explain. There's no footage of Mrs. Park boarding any bus or train after she disappeared. We are still checking. Jimin's eyes darken as frustration consumes him. His step closer to the large screen, scanning every frame. His mind flashes back to everything. The locket, the coldness between you two. His emotions churn like a storm inside him. Jimin coldly find out where every bus, car and taxi went after the accident. I don't care how long it takes, find her. His men scramble, fingers flying across keyboards, scanning more and more footage. They know they can't afford to fail him. His stern voice echoed, turning to his bodyguard. Jimin, Mark, contact every hospital in the city. Tell them if they have any record of her being admitted. Muttering to himself, he looks towards the screen again, his expression hard and unrelenting. Jimin, I'll find you. Just be safe. The officers who had first found the locket are investigating the bus, reviewing footage, comparing statements, and chasing every lead. But they know it's a race against time, especially with Jimin's cold reputation hanging over them. Officer speaking into his phone, clearly under pressure. Yes, I'm aware of the situation. The Park family is looking for her, and the last thing we need is to cross paths with Jimin Park. We need results fast. He hung up, sighing heavily. He's not looking forward to the storm that will hit once Jimin finds out just how deep the cover-up goes. You woke up with a start, gasping for air, your chest heaving and your face damp with sweat. The nightmare still haunted you, with accusation, betrayal, and painful words echoing in your mind. You tried to steady your breath, looking around the room to remind yourself it wasn't real, not completely. You looked to your side and saw a lady sat next to you, Hannah, your long-lost orphan friend. Worry was clear on her face as she leaned in, her soft voice breaking through your panic. Hannah, gently, what happened? You look like you were in so much. Tears flowed as you broke down. Hiding your face in your hand, Hannah placed a comforting hand on your shoulder, her voice gentle. Hannah, softly, but with a hint of worry. Hey, it's okay, just breathe, you're safe here. Without thinking, you noted tears spilling over, but your heart felt a quiet certainty. Hannah, softly, Ryan, do you really think he'll come? Do you think Jimin will come to find you? Your heart ached at the thought of Jimin, your husband, the man who you had loved, despite his coldness, despite his walls, despite everything. A part of you still clung to the hope that he cared, even if he never said it outright. Your body moved before your mind could catch up. You nodded without thinking, tears flowing, but your heart held a strong belief. Hannah's face softened as she watches you, feeling sad for you. She hugged you gently, holding you like a protective shield. Hannah, murmuring softly, then hold on to that hope, Ryan. If your heart believes it, then don't let go of it. Maybe he is not as far as you think. Her words were comforting, but fear still stayed in your mind. Still, you held on to the small hope that somehow Jimin would find you. Jimin's men were working tirelessly, following every lead, every trace. They scoured the city inch by inch, refusing to leave any stone unturned. Every dark alley, abandoned building, and hidden corner was searched meticulously, yet time seemed to work against them. Jimin stood before the screen, his jaw clenched, staring coldly at the details, his voice sharp and commanding, cut through the static of his earpiece. Jimin coolly, I don't care how long it takes, find her, you will not fail me. Mark, Taejun desperately, yes boss, we are checking every vehicle, every route, we'll find her. But behind Jimin's icy demeanor, fear clawed at him. The thought of you out there alone, scared or hurt, was unbearable. His resolve hardened further, no one would keep you away from him. Meanwhile, you sat quietly on the couch in Hana's apartment, staring at the peeling wallpaper. The nightmare still lingered, and the missing locket echoed in your chest, a painful reminder of everything you had left behind. You wrapped your arms around yourself, torn between fear and the faint hope that Jimin would come for you. Hana returned from the kitchen, offering you a warm cup of tea. She sat beside you, her eyes full of concern. Hana softly whined, you have been through so much, but if he finds you, what then? Do you know what you will say? You hesitated, your fingers trembling as you held the cup. You shook your head. Hana sighed, placing a comforting hand on your shoulder. Hana gently, maybe he doesn't deserve answer, but you do. Don't let him get away with silence. You nodded, tracing your wedding ring with your finger. Despite everything you knew, Jimin cared. Somewhere beneath his cold exterior, closing your eyes, you smiled softly, finding strength in the memories of his unspoken care. The hope in your heart growing despite everything, while thinking, he'll come for me, I just need to survive long enough to be found. Hours dragged on, but Jimin never wavered. He stayed rooted at his station, his piercing gaze fixed on the screen displaying surveillance footage, map, and report from his men. The sound of frantic typing and hurried updates filled the room, his voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Jimin sharply, why are there no traces of her? She shouldn't have disappeared into thin air. One of his men flinches under the weight of his glare. Men hesitant, we are expanding the search radius, boss. We have dispatched teams to the outskirts. Before he could finish, another voice crackled over the earpiece. Taejun, urgently, boss, we have found something. A lead near the outskirts of the next town. She was spotted there a few days ago. Jimin's head snapped up, heart raced, his body immediately tense, though his face betrayed nothing. Jimin demanding, send me the location, I'll handle it myself. I'm going there now. The convoy of black SUVs roared through the narrow roads leading to the outskirts. The dense forest loomed ominously in the distance as Jimin's vehicle pulled to a stop. He stepped out swiftly, his long coat billowing behind him in the cold night air. Taejun ran up to him. Taejun, boss, is a rundown shed up ahead. We found this inside. He held out a scarf. Yours. Jimin froze, his finger brushing over the fabric. The faint scent of you lingered, sending a jolt through him. His jaw tightened as he turned towards the shed. Without waiting, he strode forward, shoving the door open. The interior was dimly lit, the air cold and suffocating. His sharp eyes scanned every detail, the broken coat, a half-empty water bottle, and scattered belongings. You had been there, but you were gone. His fist clenched as he sighed as he turned to Taejun, his voice calm. Jimin, she was here. Why wasn't the place searched sooner? Taejun lowering his head. We missed it during the initial swoop. She must have left recently. Jimin's anger simmered beneath the surface, but he didn't let it explode. Instead, his mind worked rapidly, piecing together the clues. Jimin coolly, she couldn't have gone far. Double the search team, spread out to every nearby town, reviewing every camera in the area. I want roadblocks set up in every direction. His men scrambled into action. Jimin stood alone for a moment, gripping the scarf tightly. He closed his eyes briefly, his mind filled with memories of you. The way you smiled, the way you looked at him with such a trust. Guilt crowed at him, but he pushed it aside. Now wasn't the time for regrets. The search continued deep into the night, the cold wind biting against Jimin's face as he moved through the desolate area. His men secured every house, every alley, and every inch of the outskirts, but there was no sign of you. The longer it took, the darker his thoughts grew. He didn't care about the cold or the exhaustion creeping into his body. His focus was singular, finding you. Mark, running up to Jimin, slightly out of breath. Boss, we have found Mrs. Park. Jimin's head snapped toward Mark, his eyes sharp as daggers. Jimin demanding where? Dajun, boss, she was spotted near a village in the morning. A native told us that she saw Mrs. Park passing by near a group of children playing. She didn't recognize her. She is new to this area and doesn't know where she is staying. Which building? Nothing. Jimin's eyes flickered to the village, his thought racing. He was so close, but still so far. The village seemed quiet, almost deserted, and the cold air added to the eerie stillness. His fingers tightened around the scarf as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. Every step brought him closer to you, and he wouldn't rest until you were in his arms again. As they reached the center of the village, Jimin turned to his team. Jimin, check the houses, ask the locals if they have seen anything, anyone new. I want eyes everywhere. No one leaves until we find her. Tajan quickly nodded and began barking orders to the rest of the men. Jimin stood still for a moment, his gaze drifting across the village. He could feel your presence out there, close, just beyond his reach. His heart raced with the thought that you might be somewhere in these quiet streets, waiting for him to come. Jimin softly to himself, stay safe, Wyan, I'm coming for you. And with that, he steps into the shadows of the village, the search for you more urgent than ever. The night was heavy with tension as Jimin's men knocked on the door of the neighboring house. Inside, you and Hana sat on the couch, exchanging uneasy glances at the unexpected sound. Hana exchanging glances with you. Who could it be at this time? She gets up and walks cautiously to the door. Peeking through the small cracks, she saw the serious-looking men in black suit, their expression respectful but urgent, standing outside, one of them politely yet urgently showing a picture of you. Guard 1, excuse us, miss, she is Mrs. Park, our boss wife. She has gone missing and according to our information, she was seen near this area earlier today. Have you seen her? Hana's lip curved into a small smile, as if silently marveling at your faith that someone would find you. She glances back at you. Hana, you were right. He was always going to find you. She's here. Please come in. She opened the door wider, allowing the men in. They stepped inside and immediately spotted you curled up on the sofa. Relief washed over their faces as they bowed deeply in respect. Guard 2 with visible relief. Mrs. Park, we have found you. Please wait. We'll call Mr. Park right away. One of the guards made a call, and within moments you heard the sound of heavy boots against the floor, your heart pounding in anticipation, and then there he was. Jimin arrived, almost stumbling through the door, his breath heavy from running. His disheveled appearance betrayed the storm he had endured, but his eyes, sharp and desperate, softened the moment they landed on you, and the world seemed to stop. Your heart skipped the exact beat. You vaulted from the crowds, throwing yourself into his arms wrapped around you tightly, and for the first time in your marriage, he held you like you were his entire world, as if losing you would have destroyed him. Jimin, voice trembling, his hand stroking your hair. You scared me to death. Don't you dare leave me like that again. Do you hear me? You pulled back slightly, your hands trembled as they moved, signing to him with a frantic urgency. I was scared, so scared, but Jimin stopped you, his hands gently cupping your face. Jimin, I know everything. I'll listen to everything you want to say, but let's go home first, okay? You nodded as he wiped the tear from your face. He noticed Hana standing quietly in the corner when you signed to introduce her as your childhood friend and savior. He turned to her, inclining his head in gratitude. Jimin, thank you for looking after her. I owe you more than I can say. Hana nodded, her eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. Hana, soft smile, just take care of her, she murmured. With returned smile, Jimin scooped you up in his arms, catching you off guard. Your hands moved to sign a protest, but his stern gaze silenced you. Jimin, you're not walking another step. Your cheeks flushed in surprise, but Jimin didn't seem to care about the eyes watching him. His guards bowed and stepped aside, clearing the way as he carried you out. The cold night air wrapped around you, but in his arms you felt nothing but warmth and safety.